so thrilled that you're here with us today. Before we get started with our program, a few housekeeping notes. Because we don't want any wildest dreams about technical difficulties. If you run into any issues, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your window to get assistance. And if you have questions for our speaker, be fearless and use the Q&A function. The chat function is for technical problems, where the Q&A is where you can ask all the questions for our speaker for today. So there's plenty of time for that. Make sure you ask them and keep them enchanted in your mind. The number one question that we get during any webinar is, will we get the recording? Will we get the slides? Will we get the bonus materials? You will get all of that. Do not worry. So you'll receive it in 24 to 48 hours via email, along with everything will be there. So don't worry. And your feedback is all too well appreciated. So please take a moment and fill out that survey when you get it, as it helps us plan future events, and be on the lookout for it soon. Now let's shake it off and get started. Whether she's re-releasing her songs or addressing media narratives, Taylor Swift is the prime example of owning the story and captivating an audience's attention. She's a master at taking her narrative to the next level, and there's so much that comms professionals can learn from her blank space approach to storytelling. Taylor's ability to shift from tactical moves to building strategic narratives that inspire action is something we can all learn from. Our speaker will dive into that in just a bit, but just a quick reminder, please use the chat box if you have any technical issues in the Q&A function to ask our speaker any questions. Now, without further ado, our speaker for the summit is Frank Wolf, co-founder of Staffbase and author of The Narrative Age. And he is here to show you how to apply storytelling lessons from Taylor Swift to craft strategic narratives that inspire action, close communication gaps with managers, and elevate employee engagement. Frank, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Amazing moderation. I love this. I love this. I feel you loved it too. So
I did.
Let's absolutely fearless start of the webinar. So really great to be here. Really great to talk about Taylor Swift. Before I start, and I want to show you 7 points that I brought today, what communicators can learn from her music, from her life. I have to address an elephant in the room that might come up. And the question is like, Frank, you're like a middle-aged man. How do you even dare to talk about Taylor Swift? Why do you think you can talk about her? 3 points that I want to share. The first one, I'm pretty close to her universe for quite some time now. I'm a proud Swiftie dad. So in the last couple of years, I've seen and experienced a lot of what she does to her fans in my very immediate environment, and that provides a lot of background, a lot of help. But also, I was still sort of on the distance. And at some point, specifically this summer, my daughters convinced me to say, "Hey, join us for the concert." There's, as many of you know, there's this Eras tour. And I joined one of her concerts, the second concert in Munich in the summer this year, which, by the way, was remarkable, because you might see on the picture, it's in the stadium, Olympic Stadium in Munich, and on the background you see the hill. And on this hill, at this evening, there were more than 50,000 fans outside of the stadium as well. Altogether, this was about 125,000 fans. On that night, probably the best visited concert of the whole tour, and it was a remarkable evening. I have a couple specifically also learnings from the concert experience, but also more in general, as you will see. And obviously, I'm not just now a Taylor Swift fan, I'm also in the communication space for more than 20 years. 10 years ago, I co-founded Staffbase communications platform, which with now more than 2,000 customers. So I see a lot of what's happening there, and I love to think, write, and talk about communications. And I've recently written a book about the art and power of storytelling, and specifically also narrative creation. And I think that really connects very well to what she's doing, because if she's asked, like, what's the specific thing about you as an artist that makes you special and what's your thing, she's saying she's a storyteller. And I think that's one of the reason why this connects so much also for me with my work, and why I think this is so interesting. So this is what I want to talk about. I hope you can accept this as a reason why I'm allowed to speak about her. If not, let the haters gonna hate, but I shake it off. And here's the plan for today. So 7 lessons, and we will go from more strategic to more kind of ideas that are more on the very practical operational side. So I want to start a little bit with thinking about story versus narrative, how she's utilizing the narrative landscape and how she really connects to that landscape. Thoughts about theory of change and how you can use that for your own strategy generation for your communication plans. And then a couple of I think, very interesting points around storytelling, but also about how to use the attention paradox that she's playing with very well, and how to engage your audience with all-centered. So we will go into these. I will always try to connect what she's doing with kind of a general point, and hopefully be also very practical on what's actually in for you, for your jobs, for your roles. What are the practical things you can take away from this? Okay, so let's get started and go into the narrative and not just the story. When she was Person of the Year and on the here on the Time magazine, she did one of the very rare interviews, and she's not giving a lot of interviews to the media anymore. And the interesting thing is, as part of the interview and the whole discussion was that she's not just kind of controlling the narrative in her work, but in her life. And the interesting thing is, and something I learned also while I was researching for the book, and the biggest learning for many people after reading the book is there's a difference between stories and narratives. And stories are like individual tales that we tell, and stories kind of build and a pattern that we can call a narrative. The best definition that I found about this is that narratives are patterns that emerge from stories. And the big learning for communication in that field is that many communicators think about themselves as storytellers, and they are in a role in their organization to help others to tell better stories. And they think one story at a time. But strategic communication is seeing stories not at the as the end, but at a means to an end. And the real task is to build narratives. And strategic communication means telling stories in order to build and create narratives or change existing narratives. So narratives are the bigger thing, and they are fueled and shaped and changed by individual stories. That's the big difference. That's very interesting here. And the interesting point is, in terms of Taylor Swift and the way she kind of shapes and builds her own narratives, is to say, I don't want to just control the stories that I tell. I want to control the narratives that's being built. And that's sort of a trend that we see in the wider communication industry, specifically also with a lot of what's happening in the polarization of media and the sort of third-party platforms that companies use to kind of spread their message. One specific example here is Daniel Ek. He's the CEO of Spotify. And what he started to do is like a couple of hours usually before they share their quarterly results. And if a company shares quarterly results, they're usually doing this in a phone conference with analysts. So the company tells the story of the quarterly results, and then the analysts come out of this conference and they sort of say, hey, this is what the company said, this is what we think about this. So they are framing this, and they kind of, the narrative is built by the analysts and not so much the company. And what they are changing now is to say, before we go into phone conference with the analyst, he goes on X and other social media platforms, and he sort of not just reports some early numbers and early trends. There's some things you are just allowed to say in the phone conference later, but he gives the narrative themselves. Like he says, here's the story. And by the way, here's the narrative, here's the thing that we are building. Here's the overall trend where this goes into. And what he's achieving with that, not just telling the story, but be much more in control of shaping the narrative. And there are a lot of people in the industry saying, this is a trend we will see from more and more companies to kind of control the narrative even more. One recommendation I also have for you, Lulu Cheng Mercier is the Chief Communication Officer of Activision Blizzard, the games company that was acquired by Microsoft. She talks a lot about that, like go direct, and about why traditional PR is dead, why the old PR playbook of relying on third party is often misaligned with the interest of organizations. So you can also look at this a bit as a controversial issue or a political issue, but the thing that we can learn from Taylor Swift here is to say, the more you control your narrative and not just your stories, the better you can control how you're perceived, how your reputation is developing as an organization, and the better for you as an organization. So that's learning number one. Understand the difference between stories and narratives, and try not just to control the story, but what are the things to do to control the narrative. We stay in the narrative space, and for number two is the second big learning that I had from the book. And the learning is, if you want to tell stories and create narratives that really resonate with your audience, it's quite important to kind of understand what is the existing, as I call it, narrative landscape in the minds of your audience. What do people already know and believe about all things in the world, and how can you connect to that? Because if you cannot connect to that, your messages won't resonate. There are easy things like a confirmation bias, right? We want to be right, and we want to feel our view of the world is correct and is in the right way. So if new information come in which are not fitting to this existing point of view, that's a challenge for us. So the better you understand the existing narrative landscape of your audience, the more you can connect to this. And Taylor Swift is very powerful and really good at that. And we can look at it as an example. And if I look at specifically a very powerful category of narratives, which I call master narratives are deep cultural beliefs that we have based on the culture we grew up in, a deep cultural belief or a deep cultural way to tell stories is, for instance, the hero's journey, or like where an underdog faces problems, but is able to overcome these problems and finally succeed. That's a master narrative. That we love stories with this basic structure. The American dream is a deeply embedded master narrative in the society, to say, with hard work, with dedication, you can build your luck, you can realize your dreams, and you can overcome any misery, any challenge that you may see. But there are others, like the feminist movement, like romantic idealism versus disillusionment, youth coming of age. So she kind of connects to a lot of these stories, deeply embedded cultural stories. And this is the reason why her career, her music is resonating so well. So the thing is, what you can learn and what we can learn here for any communication topic that you might have, this can be your campaigns, can be a big change project, is usually a very good idea to kind of understand which existing narratives is what I'm doing here is sort of disconnecting to, because it gives you a lot of guidance on how should I build the messaging? What are the kinds of stories that I'm looking for? What is the kind of pictures, media things that I'm looking for? How can we build this, right? And what I've seen is usually pretty hard for people to think about this, because master narratives are super hard to see one of their defining criteria is they are invisible for us because they are so deeply embedded and so powerful. The good thing is there's something at a new technology that can help you, which is AI. Here's an example prompt for AI. We will share the slide. You don't have to write this down. That you can use. You can use it for any communication topic you have right now. And I guarantee you it will give you a kind of new aspect and approach to what you want to say. So you kind of teach the AI, hey, I want to learn more about master narratives, these deeply culturally shared stories. And I'm interested in exploring how these narratives relate to topic XYZ. And then you can use the topic that you have. And these large language models are very good at that, kind of connecting this to really weird, really deeply embedded narratives and kind of give you an idea of what you can do with your topic and how you can build more content around this, more stories, and how you can make it more powerful. That's part one of my connection to narrative. And I want to pick out one specific one that I find very interesting, and that could be also create a couple of ideas for specifically companies which are sort of disrupted right now. Taylor Swift, throughout her career, I don't need to tell you that she had some really remarkable moments. One of them is this one where Kanye West came on stage 2009 MTV Music Video Music Awards and pretty much said like she just got the award for the best video, and he said like you were great, but Rihanna that did the better. Beyonce, right? I guess so. I hope I'm not wrong here. Did the better video, and this was like a kind of a defining moment of her career with a lot of discussions afterwards and so on. But what sort of created this a pattern in her career of her fighting against somebody and something and some establishment, and this could be the music industry, it's Apple, the NFL. She also decided to get politically involved. So there's a pattern in her career, and I would call it it's a pattern to fight against somebody, and it's sort of she manages to still be the underdog, and I think that's a super powerful lesson because she's arguably one of the biggest stars in the world right now, and she's still kind of is able to be on the underdog side of things. And that's what I think a lot of people, specifically also women, for instance, love about her. And the learning is there's a special power to be the underdog. And the upside of being an underdog can be very big because people don't expect too much from you. There's a big, deep motivation. We all want to see the underdog succeed. And just one example from the car industry is we have there's an underdog for many years now with Tesla, and there's all these existing giant car companies, and despite them getting not even having the combined market cap of Tesla today, right? They are all seen as the big legacy players, and Tesla is able to still be the underdog. And I think for a lot of companies which are being disrupted, the question is there a way to kind of reposition ourselves, not as the failing Goliath, but can we become an underdog again? Like it involves kind of also saying, hey, we are an underdog now, right? Here are our challenges, here's the problems we face, but we want to address them, and here's a new approach to do this, and we are the underdog. So there might be the lesson is it maybe in many ways often better to be the underdog in also a communicative situation. Number 3, also a point about strategy, also something that I discovered specifically throughout researching for the book. It's about a concept that's called theory of change. And with how this connects with Taylor Swift is pretty easy. By the way, that's 3 pictures from the concert. And what you see on the left side is the way she enters the arena. She's brought in with a cleaning cart, so nobody can see her. I was super lucky to sit right there where this was coming through. I didn't plan for it. It was just luck. And then there's the concert, and after the concert, she walks off, and she was actually walking like 3 or 4 meters in front of me. So that was really fun. The thing is, during the concert, of course, she's very far away. Like you can't even really see her. Of course, you hear the music, but the music is something I heard before. So the question is, why was this such an amazing experience? Why? Like, of course, because of her, but I think she plays a rather small role in this. And a much bigger role is actually the fans to see the other people. During the concert, I would say 70,000 people singing all songs, the whole concert. Um, like it's amazing to be in already in this, and then you see before the concert like people being in front of the stadium the whole night trying to get the best places. Everyone's dressing up, and everyone is friendly, even like the police having all the friendship bands there. So such an amazing experience of people, of joy, of to say, hey, that's a crowd that's really nice to be around. And I think that's a big part of what I found really inspiring and what I really liked most. And this is a reminder to think about change processes that they usually don't happen all at once. And they happen where, like, whatever change you want to make, you have early adopters who kind of are much more likely to adopt whatever you want to tell them or what you want them to do, and they play a big role in then convincing an early majority, late majority, and so on. So if you think about me, I'm pretty much a laggard in terms of becoming a Taylor Swift fan, right? And the interesting thing, and that's the whole idea of a theory of changes, if you think about a communications plan or strategy, many think about this as a spreadsheet in terms of saying, here's the message, here's the audience, and here's the channel, and that's pretty much it. I think the first step is to kind of understand, is there a way to kind of group my audience based on these criteria? And what can I do to kind of bring on the early adopters? And how can the early adopters help me to convince others and kind of be sort of influencers for my course? And how can I play with that? And I think that's a super interesting path, specifically if you have larger change programs. I can only recommend it. Check out Theory of Change, read about this. There's a lot more to this theory. It's usually also used for multi-year programs, but I think it's a very helpful concept and a reminder to that you don't have to be the one to tell the story all the time. Maybe it's the early adopters that do your job for the others, the early majority or others, right? Number 4, how leaders can build a genuine connection with the audience. And now we come into a more like operational things. And during the concert, there's a moment, if you've been there, it's the song 22. It's the song with the hat. So she's wearing a hat. And during the song, there's usually a girl brought to stage, and she gives the hat to the girl. And like the whole stadium is like, is crying and weeping, and like everyone's like super emotional. It's a fantastic moment, and usually the girl totally freaks out and is totally happy and everything, right? I think it's a great reminder how to build authenticity with your leaders. So if you have leaders and you think about CEO communication and other things, and you kind of have somebody who's sort of not a great communicator or in many ways, or you think about how can we make this more relatable, um, it it can be as easy as sort of bringing this person in contact with just one person from the audience and kind of make this a good experience. And I think the very obvious ones is the things that a lot of CEOs are doing, and specifically going to the front line, doing the shifts and so on. They don't have to be great communicators at that moment. It's just such a powerful message when they are there and they are sort of see and are part of the people there, right? And that's just something you need to have in the moment, and just need the picture or video or things like that. And that's a powerful motivator for everyone in the company, kind of to see like he or she's one of us, and like this sort of leading from the front, I think is super powerful and something she does really well in her concerts, and it's great to do for leaders. Number 5, the attention paradox. That's a tricky one, but I think that's an interesting one. There's a trend, and I'm sure many of you know this trend also, and you've seen it too. So the attention span of the audience goes down and down and down. Like on I think the average length of a video on TikTok is a couple of seconds, right? And that's obviously a challenge for communicators. And by the way, there's a new trend. What you see on the left side, it's not just on TikTok, but on others as well. Um, it's these multiple videos cut it together into one video to say, I show people, because everyone is so used to a second screen, they can't keep their attention on one screen. You on the right side, you have Subway surfers there, you have things from a movie and then something else. And with these 3 videos together, you are able to keep people's attention. There's also a lot of things where somebody's doing a podcast, and on the second screen, there's Subway servers, or somebody plays the piano and there's Subway servers. It's this sort of, you cannot keep the young audience without a second screen. And the second screen I brought you here is actually from my daughter. I made this week. She's doing math homework on her iPad. And while she's doing math homework, she's watching Outer Banks in the screen on the iPad. My brain would literally explode if I would try to do that, like zero chance. But there's this sort of, this is what we are faced with, right? So, and the thing could be to say, okay, everything we do needs to be super short, super video formats or whatever, we have 5 seconds, 10 seconds to get the things across, right? However, there's one lesson from Taylor Swift here that I wanted to share. She's really great at engaging her audience with mystery and these Easter eggs, right? There's many examples of this. One is she has a favorite number, which is 13. And then there's when she's releasing, she released Fearless, and it's available April 9. And so April 9 is 13. So that's a very basic idea of what this is doing. She's also done a lot of the lyric books where she has some letters capitalized. And if you bring in the capitalized letters together, you get hidden messages from the books and so on. So there's a lot of these Easter eggs. Fans love this. They try all the time kind of to understand what's going on. One of the biggest current discussions, you may be aware of this, is when does she release Reputation, Taylor's version? So that's every single word she's saying, is kind of analyzed, like when is this happening and so on. And I think it's interesting because we have on the one side people who are sort of need a second or third screen to keep their attention on. On the other side, there's so much energy and so much love to kind of go in detail into the mystery. And that's what I would call the attention paradox. It's not all easy to consume. People are willing to consume very tricky things. And if you specifically talking and communicating to a younger audience, think about how can you build in a bit of mystery, right? Maybe if you have the 50th anniversary of the company or something like this, so you have a number, and maybe how can you play with that? How can you bring in specific Easter eggs in your communication, in some of the games that you have? It might not be appealing for the whole audience, but it might be pretty interesting for an audience that's usually harder to reach, or that's kind of expects a different style of communicating. So we just see with Taylor Swift that this is working. And another aspect of it, I'm not sure if the curve would be the same. The whole rise of podcasting, people being willing spend 1, 2, 3 hours in one conversation, is an amazing sign that people already also are open to other kinds of getting information and getting media. So understanding these options and kind of playing with them is becoming more and more important. And I think it's a great way to rebuild also the reputation as communicators, to say the current media mix is much more diverse and complex than it was before. And we are specialists in turning in kind of understanding which kind of messages, which kind of stories are best in which medium, and how to use them, and what are the upcoming mediums. Also, if you've seen things like, I think it's called Notebook LLM, it's like an AI generated podcast that Google brought out. That's also, there's a lot of developments that will make it much easier kind of to build new kind of mediums, also podcasts around certain topics. So the attention paradox is definitely interesting to keep in mind on that side of things. Number 6, create impact telling stories versus experiencing stories. And the interesting thing is, this is the picture of the same evening, the same concert, but from the mountain. And I got it from Victoria. She's a communicator from Germany. And it turned out she was there at the same evening. And the funny thing is, it also turned out she became a Taylor Swift fan that evening too. And she didn't have to be in the stadium. The sound was sort of, they heard sort of what was going on, but she was so overwhelmed by just seeing the fans there and kind of seeing all the enthusiasm and like everyone singing along and so on. And we already talked about it, like how powerful it is to see sort of the early adopters of this and kind of see these people and how convincing this is. But I want to make a different point here as well. And I want to talk about the power of experience. And this means there's one thing if you can tell a great story and you can tell an emotional story, but it's always remains telling. And the difference is, and the question is there a way to not tell a story to your audience, but is there a way to help your audience experience the story? And a great example to kind of think about this is, I think, if you think about a wedding, usually communication, and you would say, like, at a wedding, what would be the typical role of communication, like if coming into an organization, right? And typically, communication would be the storyteller. It would be like the best man speech, right? That's what comms is all about. Like we're telling the story. But this kind of new approach to say storytelling is not actually telling a story, but helping people experience this. And some also call it immersive storytelling. In this scenario, communication would be the story maker and kind of the wedding planner, right? Not having the speech, but sort of planning the event, planning who sits at which table, what's coming, like what's the cultural program, who do you invite to do the speech, and what's like, maybe is there fireworks, are there other things, special things, is there video, and so on. So the story maker sort of builds the experience and kind of makes sure that sort of the experience sort of convinces people. And I think in a wedding, you all want guests go away and say, it was a remarkable experience. Like, I will never forget this. And I think this is a very special relationship that I witnessed here today. And you can do this by telling, but you can also do this by story making. Now, this might sound really sort of like a complex thing. And yes, in many cases it might be, but I want to show you a very super easy example to kind of open the mind a bit, like where could this go? A lot of the companies we talk to right now think about AI and how can they communicate inside the company about AI in a positive way and in a way that's energizing for employees and where they really want to learn more about AI, because many people are scared about this and fear that it might take their jobs and so on, right? That's an example from DHL, and they from a workshop that they did in the communications department, and they played a couple of games with AI. This is a very that's one of the games where you think about a famous person. And other players try to ask you questions and find out who's the famous person. And then they play this with real people, and then they tried this with AI and kind of wanted to see, is AI faster in kind of guessing the famous person, or are humans faster? What's happening with this is, by playing with AI, you sort of lower the barrier of fear and of like, what is this? And it's in a playful way, help people to interact with AI. And that's a very easy, basic example of, to say, talking versus experiencing. And the lesson for communication here is, for all the things right now, your projects that you're doing and all the messages you want to get across, is there maybe a way to not tell it, but help people experience it by themselves? By playing games, by also maybe having some real life experiences, walking people somewhere in a specific room, in a specific setting. Is there a more creative way to kind of get a message across? Last point, engage your audience with all senses. And that's pretty much, I think, at the end of the concert, everyone is highly emotional, highly engaged. Yeah, amazing setup. The one thing that this reminded me of again is like how powerful music really is in 4 hour senses, and how powerful it is to dance, and how powerful it is to be together with other people and kind of experience this together. It's amazing. And here's the thing. We all know, like with remote work and with all that, there are less opportunities to actually come together and to kind of have an event together, or kind of feel the emotional connection we have together as a company or as a team. And when we do it, it's often the way that is super expensive. Like, we fly people in, we have to book hotels and like the meetings and all this and all the catering and blah, blah, blah. So but not just for company events, but also for professional events. So whenever we do events, it's super expensive to organize all the logistics, to have everyone there. And what's a pity then, if people are there to have a normal standard business agenda and don't think beyond that in terms of, how can I kind of dial up emotions a bit here, right? I want to give you one specific example from Staffbase. We are doing many events throughout the year. Our biggest event right now is the Voices conference. It's a communications conference. Voices in English is something we are doing digitally, virtually, but we do it in Berlin once a year on site with more than 2,000 communicators. And a couple of years ago, we made a decision, and I can tell you it's very expensive, right? A couple of years ago, we made a decision to say, when we do it, we have a live band there. And this band is playing pretty much throughout the day. We have certain performances with them, but they are also playing if a speaker comes on stage and so on. And yes, is this expensive? Sort of, but like compared to the overall cost, it's like a fraction of the cost. But this band alone makes such a difference in how people are engaged and how emotional and how kind of this is kind of moving people. A lot of them going away from this conference and say, that's not a conference, that was like a concert, it was like a festival. Somebody actually wrote on LinkedIn this year, I've never had so much fun at a business related event ever in my life, right? And the idea here is, if you kind of spend the money, have the resources, and kind of put things in, try to think, how can I dial up the sort of emotional side of my events? Can I bring in a DJ? Can I bring in live music? Should we have a video in the beginning, like 2-minute last year pictures, music, whatever? I think this is paying off big time. And I can say, first time we decided to have a band, I was uncomfortable because it was like, is this weird, or like, are not people liking? But at the end, we are all humans, and we all love music. We all love to be kind of, so have this connection together. So I think a big learning here is invest in emotions, not just the travel, not just all of this. but invest in emotions. And that's something that's super powerful. Cool. So I hope there were a couple of interesting thoughts and ideas for your communications work. So we went from the more top-level narrative side of things to strategy, theory of change, and then specifically a couple of ideas how leaders can build a better connection with their audience, the attention paradox, telling versus experiences, things, stories, and engage your audiences with all senses. Great. Before we come into questions, 3 things. If you want to learn more and if you want to continue the conversation, 1, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm writing about this things from time to time, and I will share more on specifically storytelling and narratives. If you think this narrative topic is interesting, feel free to check out the book, The Narrative Age. It's available on Amazon and sort of has a lot more of obviously details on kind of how to think about narrative versus story. What's a narrative map, how to build a narrative map, what are the key narratives that communicators should know, like a North Star narrative and so on, and how to change narratives and how to also build, as I call it, a narrative moat to protect the company and the company's reputation. The book is specifically written for communicators and storytellers to kind of introduce the concept of narratives and the kind of state-of-the-art research around that. Last point, if you're interested in how we at Staffbase are kind of thinking about this topic and how we bring this into our employee communications platform, feel free to check out staffbase.com. Staffbase is an end-to-end employee communications platform with all the channels like email, intranet, and employee app and digital signage and connections to Microsoft and everything else. If you are interested there, I know this was not a webinar about Staffbase, but if you want to check out Staffbase, we are really happy about it. Check it out at staffbase.com. Great. So thank you. And Isis, back to you and happy to answer questions that we may have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Frank. That was awesome. Especially those photos that you shared. That was really cool to see that Taylor was being pushed in through that cleaning trolley. But I'm going to do a quick check here to see if we've got any questions in the chat. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. But I do have a question for you, Frank. How can leaders make their connections with employees feel authentic, especially when there's a need to communicate tough or sensitive topics?
I think it's like what I talked about here in the webinar is, for me, is a build up. Like it's you wouldn't, if you have a tough topic, you wouldn't sort of go to the front line and talk at the front line about it. I think it's more, it's a 2-step thing. One is I think it's great for a leader to build a narrative that you listen to the people and that you are there where it hurts and that you are like also, I talk a lot about this in the book also about if you talk about things, you have to kind of recognize the local narrative. Like if you have if your customer service sucks for some reason, right? And you say our customer service is great, like people at that moment will turn off and say like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So if you authentically connect to the current narrative landscape, if you like show people you're at the front line and you know what's going on, this is the basis then to say also for crisis situation, to kind of build the trust that you need then in case of a crisis or in we have layoffs or we have hard decisions that we need to talk about. That's sort of the basis for this.
Great. Yeah, kind of like some of the examples you shared with the photos. We do have a couple of questions here. Someone asked, do you have any suggestions for leaders to engage with a primarily remote workforce?
I think one is the is actually the whole idea of authenticity.
Mhm.
Um, the more we don't see each other in an office anymore, and kind of can't see and feel that it's just two humans on the water cooler, I think the more you have to show about yourself as a person, share like who you are, what you do, try not be too sort of distant in many ways. And I think uh, that for me would be one of the key aspects of this communication and in this regard, and kind of um, sort of also surprise people by the way you sort of know certain details about what's going on in the company, what's happening at the front line, and maybe also overshare your thinking around topics. I'm a huge fan of leaders who can talk very sort of also critical of their business and sort of say, hey, here's the three things I learned this year, which I things I didn't know before. Here's the things that we got wrong this year. I think this builds trust, specifically in an organization where you are disconnected. You have to be more open and be more and sharing more of your thinking behind that.
I love that. Someone asked, are there any companies doing some of these strategies well that you know of that you can point to?
Um, I think there's a in that's it's a great question, but it's a very general question in
Yeah.
these regards. I think the what I have this in the book. For instance, there's a lot of things you can learn from this, right? The the one of the things is that you could ask yourself, specifically based on the narrative discussion, is how are we articulating our mission and vision for our employees and for our stakeholders as a company, right? I have a whole chapter in the book, and like to give you the 1 minute version, I think it's for a vision quite important to understand that the vision should be a narrative. It should be a here's where we are today, here's where we want to go. Like it should be a transition. It should be not a vision cannot be just a goal. Like that's not enough. A vision is something you talk about a future state and a future that you would like to build or see together with your stakeholders, right? And the better this future and the more convincing this future, the more stakeholders will say, yes, that's a future I also want to work on. That's sort of, so it's a big check, like, do you have a good vision?
Mhm.
And I explain in more detail in the book, like how you know that, right? That's a big learning from this. And the mission is then like sort of what are we doing as part of this future? Like how do we contribute? Like ideally, a vision is bigger. It's not just a company. It's something that's a common future that we want to build. I usually also say if a vision should be something that you can tell your brother or mother or somebody else in your family who's not in your company and says, I like that, right?
Mhm.
It's great that you work there. Keep on doing that because I want to see that too, right? Is it inclusive or do more people care about that? That's one of the things
I love
to
that.
consider.
Another question, is the goal to hone in on your early adopters moving forward? I find this approach is incredibly helpful for people with established visibility. Beyonce has done interviews for years. Taylor has done press tours for years. Elon being a lifelong leader in learning. But for brands still new to a particular space, how can they apply this knowledge?
I think it's, and I guess that's the question to say, um, no, I start different. Um, I'm a business leader. Like I've built with many others Staffbase from an early startup now to a global company, and I've like also personally was responsible to establish Staffbase in the US many years ago and to build this and build our PR program and so on. And I would say if you don't have a message and you don't have a story, third-party media PR is super, super, super hard to get through. And I think it's it's not this sort of we are small and we don't have a story, so we get other people to talk about it. I think it's not working anymore. It's not at all, right? And nobody wants to hear this even then from your PR company or whatever. Like if they want to hear it from you, and kind of the only ways to build this is with your own voice at your own channels. And this is the basis then to get picked up and to kind of have these other things. I think there's no other way around this. I can really highly recommend to check out what I shared about from Lulu Cheng Mercier, like about this Go Direct manifesto. I really believe in that because I've done this journey myself. If you have a brand which is new in the market or a non-loved brand, so you're lacking attention, as one other thought here, the whole concept of narratives is also specifically important for you because narratives is something that you can build over time with story after story. And with that, it's specifically important to say, what is the one narrative I want this market to know about me? And everything I do pays into this one single narrative. I don't try to tell a lot of stories all over the place. I try to hone in on this one narrative. And I understand the narrative landscape of my market really well. Where does this resonate really well, right? So is there a specific issue that my target audience has that they care about where I can connect to and kind of play these narratives over years? And that's, I think, the best recipe I know for getting more attention.
Love that. How do we engage leaders in narrative creation?
Ooh, that's I asked a communicator a couple of even years ago to say, hey, what do you think about narratives? And he was like saying, I'm already struggling to explain storytelling to my CEO. I don't even want to introduce the term narrative. But here's a different thing. We did Voices on Tour, like it's through the US in September and October. And in Chicago, I talked about narratives. And afterwards, a communicator came to me and she said, Frank, I now know why I have a big misunderstanding with my leader for years now, because he keeps telling me, we need a new story. I need a new story from you. And I keep bringing him stories, and he's not happy. And what I learned today is that he actually tells me we need a new narrative, right? And that my job is to kind of together with him create and build, kind of think about what's the narrative we want to build and which are the stories then that kind of build this narrative. So what I would say about this, it's super helpful to kind of discuss with your leaders to understand the difference between both concepts. And because many companies and startups, and you hear them say all the time, oh, what's your story? We need a new story. No, they don't. They need a new narrative, right? That's a huge difference. And I think it helps to clarify the term quite a lot, specifically because it means, hey, communicators are way more strategic if they start to talk about narratives, because that's what you should be. You should be narrative creators.
Awesome. We've got one more here. We currently run quarterly all hands and would like to shift them to town hall style events. But we have leaders that refuse town hall style meetings. They don't want to take questions from employees. How can we, as comms people, address this with leaders as it relates to using all senses to connect with employees? People are really interested in knowing what our leaders think.
Yeah, I totally can see this, and I think it's a setup that many communicators face. And I think it's also fair to say leaders are afraid of getting questions that they couldn't prepare for and so on. Like a lot of leaders are able to do that, some are not. And my advice here is try to think of, is there another format that you can create or build to sort of lower the fear of the leader and make this a bit more controllable situation? I give you an example. It could be that as sort of part of the preparation of the town hall, people can already submit questions and you kind of, or vote on questions and leaders, and you sort of are able to say, hey, we have these questions, and as part of the town hall, we answer this. Like Is there a way to make this a bit more a controlled experience where you can sort of anticipate questions coming in and having sort of this discussion that's going on? That would be one idea. Maybe there are other ideas. I think it's always about can you create a bit more controlled situation that's happening? And I'm like, from what I experienced in the past, if you do that, leaders will will rather be the one to say, oh no, give me more questions. What else do you have once they are in the situation? They're more scared about this beforehand. But like, how can you lower the risk for them initially?
Awesome. Well, I think that is all the questions that we have, but thank you so much for sharing, Frank. And thank you to our audience for being so engaged and having great questions and interacting with each other in the chat. And as you can take a look at the screen, if you take out your phones and scan the QR code to look at our full schedule for Comms Week, because as you know, are in the middle of Comms Week, and this is just one of our many events that will take place this week. We have our in-person conference kicking off today in Austin, Texas, and we've got at least two more virtual events still yet today. So there's just so many opportunities to connect, to learn, and just check out what we're sharing. But that brings our time today to a close. And as a reminder to our audience, you will receive today's materials with a survey within 24 to 48 hours. So please take a few minutes and fill that out so we can help our future programming. And on the behalf of Reagan Communications and Staffbase, thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day.